So like say like the Windows Phone, the old Windows Phone operating system, like that you would automatically be able to do credit card transactions with it. They might decide that that's the sort of thing that's desirable to them. Well, I mean, Urbit is the sort of thing where because you have crypto as a first-class feature, your Bitcoin wallet, your Ethereum wallet, whatever wallet you need, it's just in there. It works. It's part of your operating system. So anything in your operating system that needs to talk to it, it's there. It's not this other add-on into it. But that said, there's also a lot of simplifying forces to make sure that Urbit doesn't end up totally weird and bloated the way that everything else that we've ended up with is. So, harkening back to Tlon's definition of Urbit, we have two things. We have the operating system. This schematic is what they're using to describe the operating system. It describes the interlanguage NOC, which is this yellow key-like piece, and then Arvo, which is the operating system. I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a minute. Arvo is composed of several services, which are these blocks here. Right now, they're about proportionally the size of the number of lines of code that they take to write, so you can sort of see like how big the different pieces of the operating system are, and then user applications on the outside. This is sort of like me telling you about Windows by let's talk about Microsoft Foundation classes and C++ and Visual Studio, which unfortunately that's kind of where we're stuck in talking about Urbit at this point, because that's sort of the only things that really exist in it. Like there aren't games yet, there aren't a lot of user space applications out there yet. It's very programmer heavy at this point. And then the other thing is the identity. So you have your system, you have your identity. Now, as Lana Del Rey said, before we go out, what's your address? Identity on Urbit is scarce. Okay, there's a finite amount of identity. It's not effectively infinite the way that the current internet system has things set up. Okay, it's like the internet system now, like we move from IPv4, IPv6, like we're interested in sort of expanding out like the kinds of things we can address. Urbit actually wants identity to be finite, and it wants a reputation system attached to identity. So if you own a point in the address space, you have an incentive not to turn it into a botnet, because everyone else is going to censure that point. You're going to lose the reputation, and you're not even going to be able to resell it to anyone. Like it loses whatever value it had by being tagged as a bad actor on the network. Right now, there is a reputation system built. It's not currently active on the network because there are so few people on the network. It's kind of like being on the internet in 1997. Like it's a lot of weirdos and geeks, and like it's a really interesting place to talk to people right now. But it's not. Yeah, go ahead.
But just to clarify, it would be sort of like if we had only 1 billion Gmail addresses in the entire world forever, you'd be getting a lot less spam mail because everyone would block you.
With reputations attached to that, to those addresses.
Yep.
Right, that there's a way you can actually keep track of.
Figure out what.
No, this is a spam address. I mean, this is what's happening with phone numbers right now, right?
Yeah.
There's a finite number of phone numbers, and you get called, and you already know if it's a spam number or not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
It'll say it'll sometimes say likely a spam, even though if it's not. But that means at some point that number may have been used for spam.
Right. So there's some sort of weighting system on it.
But the bad thing is that you inherited that number. Some people are not like picking your calls.
Well, there's weird things about it too, right? Because like if you're everyone. So like if you switch phone providers and you get a new number, right, they have this block of phone address space that they're assigning you from. And if it's the same block that they're pulling their burner phone numbers from, then yeah, you're going to get a low quality phone number. It's going to take you a long time to sort of build up the reputation of that system. So ultimately, in 30 years, it'll probably feel something like that, where you'll have this stable address that you refer to, but you also want to take care of it, right? So like if you go to urbit.org, the thing it says on the first page is Urbit is your last computer. And their pitch for that is that like once you own this thing, you can own it forever. Or you can sell it to someone, but it's like a house. Like it's like a thing that you own that is this actual piece of property that is meaningful. the same way that you would buy a domain name and you might hang on to a domain name forever.
So it's your property.
Yes. Your cryptographic property. Right, so like you are the only ones even with the keys to get access and look at it.
And you mentioned that these Urbit identities are going to stay finite?
Yes,
Okay. And that's to kind of uphold a reputation?
yes. So let me talk a little bit about what the structure of the address space looks like.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
I didn't quite understand that, the last part you were saying about you have access to what, I mean, like, I'm visualizing like you have an avatar that interacts with the internet world. That's your digital identity that does everything through that, like an actual true avatar. You know, not like, you know, these fake avatars.
So let me,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let me see
having
if I
your
can
own
answer
video
that.
game character that navigates the internet world, and everything is, you use him to do everything.
right, so let me
So
answer
it's
that.
It's your internet real estate, but that's fluid. Just-
Right. So there's a few different ways you can think about how this interacts. I'm going to talk about it from an address space perspective first, and then we can keep attacking it from different angles.
Okay.
So the Urbit address space is essentially an up to 128-bit number that you are assigned, right? So the full size of the address space is 2 to the 128, so that's about, I worked this out.
4 billion.
2 to the 128th is about 340 times 12 sets of 3 zeros. So 2 to the 128th is a fantastically large number. Most of that address space is automatically like zero reputation space. Like if you spawn there, you're gonna have zero reputation. You have to build a reputation up from, like, your assumption is that you don't trust things that are spawned in that part of the address space. So let's start from like the high trust region and work our way down. So the high trust region is, so the most limited aspect of it are what are called galaxies, and these are the first 256 points in the address space. So address 0, address 1, address 2, address 3, all the way up to address 255. Their main role in the ecosystem is governance. So these are the address points that are responsible for actually making decisions about what the architecture of the system should look like long term. Right now, most of this is handled by the corporation Tolan that's developing this, but they've been testing the infrastructure for like how they actually want governance to take place. So this is sort of, you know, as you move forward, these are sort of like the what's IPAC? What's the internet consortium that manages the way the domain names and everything are assigned? ICANN. So yeah, ICANN. So they're sort of like ICANN. They make the architectural decisions about what's going on. And
Are they gonna have internet police?
Well,
not
no.
people, but actual software. That
Everyone's the internet.
No. So
You're already the internet.
this
Right.
is
Everybody's
true.
there,
This
that's
is
what-
true
well, yeah,
peer to
that's
peer.
true.
This is true peer to
Peer,
peer.
that's great.
So and it's encrypted end to end, peer to peer with end to end encryption. So in a sense, you can't police, right?
Right.
Like you can censure bad behavior by particular actors who are like contacting people they shouldn't, but like as long as they're not doing things that are actively destructive to the civilization of the network, you're not going to worry about them. You're going to let them do their thing. You're going to build their own community. Okay, we need to talk about names on Urbit and symbols for a minute because we're going to keep looking at these pictures. So what they've done is they've mapped the set of points of different parts of your address to monosyllables. So like if you are address space 0, the monosyllable associated with that is Zod. Okay? And there's a lot of others, like address space 1 is Ness, address space 2 is something else on down the line. And so you're going to see names like tilde Zod, tilde 10. If it's monosyllable, it refers to a galaxy. So these are like the big parts of the network, the major players in the network system. Right now, they've been given mainly to investors and venture capitalist firms. Also, every monosyllable has a symbol or a sigil attached to it. So if you work in the Urbit space for very long, you start to see people with these kinds of symbols as their avatars and everything online, because they're kind of aesthetic, and there's a lot of different ways to look at them, but like that's where they come from. So in a sense, this doesn't matter. The names are a really useful heuristic, because it's much easier to remember a name than it is to remember an address. So people prefer to use the names. Like at the beginning, when I introduced myself, I said I'm Lagrev Nokfep. That's some address number. I don't even know what the address number is. I'd have to run the algorithm backwards to figure out like what syllables correspond to Lagrev Nokfep. But I can remember Lagrev Nokfep. That's a really easy one for me to carry around. There are a number of stars. These are responsible for routing and network identification. It's true peer-to-peer in the sense that once you've talked to someone else, you know how to talk to them forever. But if you haven't talked to them before, you have to have someone to route your information to them. So that's what the star layer does. So this is the next kind of address space. This is the next 65,280 slots in the address space.
Can you just explain that again, the relations and how you need to be introduced?
Yeah, I should probably be drawing this out. This is one of those places where Urbit starts to get weird. So, let me make some room. All right, so what happens is we're going to divide, so we have this entire block of address space. It has 2 to the 128th points in it. Okay, so any point would be just a number, a raw number. A tiny piece of that, 2 to the 8th, are what are called galaxies. The name galaxy doesn't mean anything special. It's just a way of sort of describing like these are the most special pieces of the system. They're the scarcest part of this system. That's why they're called galaxies. They're the scarcest part. There's another block of 2 to the 16th addresses called stars that again are just identities that someone can have, but they perform this particular role in the ecosystem of routing new addresses to talk to other addresses. They're like right now what we do is if we're doing TCP/IP, we throw packets out there and we throw them to our internet service provider, and they throw it through the network, and it sort of randomly, it runs on lots of different algorithms and packet routing algorithms, and it makes its way to the other end. You send 2 packets, they're not going to take the same route, right? Like it's just kind of this weird random system. Urbit, once you know what's going on, you're talking straight to each other. Like your cloud hardware is talking straight to theirs. Right now, this is all built on top of a layer of TCP/IP. There's no real reason that would have to be set up that way, but that's
TCP/IP was set up for like military communication in case, to my understanding, something gets destroyed. There's redundancies, and it takes different routes, but it takes the data. If you had a letter and it would break it up in a bunch of little fragment pieces, and some will go this way, some will go that way, and then the protocol would have them reassemble at the end of the journey.
Yep.
So
we're kind of not dealing with that level, like what's actually going on with the routing, because right now it all happens over TCP/IP anyway.
you're going over the layer over it.
Yeah, essentially.
Right.
Then there's another block, which is 2 to the 64. Just need to say planets. So these are the planets. These are basically like your own identity. These are the pieces that you actually want to like carry around, refer to. This is the thing that you want, okay? So planet is typically 4 syllables, so like Lagrev Nokfep. None of these are Lagrev Nokfep, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's 4 pieces. So this is what you see everyone referring to when they talk about who they are on Urbit. This is the thing that they show. So you'll see these on Twitter and other places.
So you'll actually see these unique pictographs of shapes?
Yep.
So that's your signature identity. That's cool.
Right, it's unique. There's
is unique.
too many of them to sort of learn to read them backwards, unfortunately. I think that'd be kind of a neat skill, but there are 1,024 different symbols in the system, so it's too many to keep track of. So these are your individual stable identity. So what this means is when you own, like I'm Lager of Nogfa, the idea is the value proposition from the perspective of identity is pwned, system is pwned, what was the other one?
The stack is pwned.
Stack is pwned. What Urbit proposes to do is that this becomes your single sign-on for all services that you use, and that you retain ownership of all the data that you generate. That your data live with you, right? If you need to carry out a particular transaction, this is your identity for doing it. It is kind of like an avatar in that sense. It's kind of like a universal LastPass master password setup, but it's you, right? So on the good end of this means that you have the ability to never have to sign into anything again, right? You keep track of one identity that takes care of everything that you need. On the downside of this, you have to treat this like your Bitcoin keys, right? Like you have to keep this secure because it's your digital life. And ultimately, there'll probably be ways of storing more subsidiary logins and everything with this. Actually, planets are 32, but I should be accurate there. Ultimately, there'll be more subsidiary ways of handling it. But right now, that works because there's 4 billion of them, so we're not. It's finite, but it's at the scale that humanity would need finiteness, not at the scale that it's completely free for everyone. Right now, if you want to get on the Urbit network, you need one of these identities. So you either know someone who has some identities to give away, or you can buy one for about $10 via one of the Ethereum networks.
But there's only 1,024.
No, there are 4 billion of these.
No, it's about those.
Oh, the symbols. Yeah, there's only 1,024 unique pieces here. These symbols.
But then total was like 4
But
billion.
there's variation of that
Variation.
1,024.
Yes, all the permutations of what's going on. Yeah.
So where are the 4,000 or 4 billion other ones? Is that
I mean,
so like?
There's
you said how many people are
We'll get to
on
those
Urbit right now?
okay, so right now, I don't know how many there are total on Urbit right now. I would guess that actively on Urbit is
Well-
probably on the scale of a couple hundred, like people that are developing and writing new things. It's not huge, but it's not non-existent.
Yeah. Okay. So when those people reach out to another person
Mhm.
to get them on Urbit, then is one of those created?
So like, where do these come from?
Yeah.
Great, okay.
Yeah.
So you can create a new sort of unstable identity, although you could use it permanently, from the whole block of 2 to the 128.
Mhm.
That's sort of the free way to do it, but the downside is it takes a long time because you start at this random address point, and then you actually have to go find a DNS router to sponsor you. So it's not really recommended. Right now, the way it works is you either know someone who has some invites to give away, which is fairly common at this point because they want people to use the network, right? Or you can, when you buy one, you're buying, so galaxies own a certain number of stars. All the stars are allotted to galaxies, and all the planets are allotted to stars. And so it's like do you want to mention anything about like sort of the crypto speculator?
Yeah, so the idea
perspective?
being that if 100 million people decide to start running their identity on Urbit, they would be buying it from a star, and early investors and other speculators own the stars. So I could sell you one for $5, $10, and I would have 65,000 IDs that I could sell for $10, $5, $20 maybe. And it's just a matter of finding a person who has a star, which you can just do online. Pretty much just buy one as you would any kind of cryptocurrency, but then you can boot your Urbit once you have that ID, once you have that planet.
Well, once you purchase an Urbit ID, and let's say you did get invited or anything like that.
Yeah.
does this go back to what you were saying, like, you're not really a trustworthy source or identity? Because you started from the outside and you have to go kind of back in?
Well, at this point, there is no active reputation system.
Okay.
It exists, but it is not active because there's too few people to like
Okay.
care at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's,
Like at this point, it's like if you went into a chat room and someone kept swearing all the time, you'd ignore them, right? Like it's not the sort of thing. So yes, like in the long run, you'd have to say, okay, what happens with sort of a zero reputation point? I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. You're probably going to have to do some things to sort of build a reputation to get snappier service on the system or something.
Maybe you.
But that's a problem of like new points. That would be another reason why, you know, you might see people building up reputation across a number of points and then turning around and selling them for, you know, $30 instead of the regular 15 or so.
No, I know. So I was developing a really advanced bartering system, and the thing is, I was in the beginning I was struggling trying to figure out like, what do we do with people that have no it's like no credit history, right?
Right.
No credit history. Okay. So then I thought about it, I said, okay, well, I'll give them an opportunity to earn credit by volunteering. If you volunteer 3 times, you get validated, you know, by somebody in the network. Maybe you got to get validated by somebody who owns a star, maybe instead of a planet, if you want to put a rule, just as an idea. And, you know, either 3 stars or you get validated by 10 planets, you know, whatever.
So-
12 planets, whatever.
And
I'm just throwing out
Yeah, so
ideas.
like to that point, Neil, if you own a star, can you censure routing for one of your daughter planets that you own? Can you prevent them from
vouch for them?
delivering data to any other to a planet on other stars, or do other stars have to
Right.
They act as
block the
gatekeepers.
other- Yeah,
Right now, there's not a mechanism for that.
but in theory, could
Well,
I do that for one of my
Yes and
planets?
no.
Yeah.
So right now, a star sponsors a bunch of planets, and if planets want to talk to new planets, they have to go via the star.
Yeah.
But planets are not tied to stars permanently. If a planet wants to switch to having a different sponsor, it can do so.
Okay.
This isn't really like user space, like everyone who uses it is going to want to worry about this, but there's going to be a technical backend where you would worry about that kind of thing. Like if a star is always offline, right? Like someone set it up and sold a bunch of planets off of it and then shut it down and didn't run it anymore.
Or lost it. Yeah.
Right, so everyone, you're going to want to, like, the system is already set up so that all those planets can find other sponsors.
Okay.
It's an additional step. It'll probably be automatic someday.
Yeah.
And then I know somebody that actually has a he uses the blockchain, and for his system he developed that will actually validate the work that you do. So like if you're like a graphic designer, right, and you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for a graphic designer, with his system you'll see, okay, we got there's 5 different graphic designers. Everybody that hasn't been validated, that doesn't have a track record in the system, would give you a sample of their work based on what you requested. You say, I want this, and that. So they give you a sample, right? And those out of those 5, you pick and choose whoever. But there's a way of validating through this blockchain. So I'm just throwing out a couple ideas that assist with what you're talking about.
Well, there's like Ravencoin does some things like that too,
You know,
which is kind of a way of thinking about art ownership in the crypto space.
it's called what?
Ravencoin?
Art ownership in crypto space.
Yeah.
Ravencoin. I'm gonna look it up.
So I think you kind of already answered one part of this question, but what exactly would be like punitive measures for, planets to do to their subservient, caste or whatever?
Well, okay, so, I mean, what you would see is like, so let's say you had a planet that was essentially acting as a spammer. It means that anyone who receives a new contact from this planet can go look it up and see, is this actually a trusted actor? I would expect that at some point that would probably be the default. So
Would
it is
there be
kind
a
of like your
ledger
phone,
type?
right? Like if someone calls your phone, you know, it already knows.
And yeah, and so we already have the flagging technology. This would give you the ability to pick and choose whether it is able to reach you, because you are in control of like reading and writing of all data.
But are there any mechanisms in you know, process of being developed right now that would prevent abuse of, you know, maybe tanking someone's reputation score?
Yeah, that was my concern too.
How would you tank someone else's reputation?
Because people
score?
could make it up and say, "Oh, you did this or that."
Or
Well,
someone
it's-
with more power, like a better reputation within the urban space, let's say.
That's a good.
Well,
point.
but it's based on, I mean, all your communications are end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer. So no one can fake being you.
That's the
Or
point.
could they,
They could maintain a bad faith listing, for instance, of who's considered high reputation or not.
It makes me think of Craigslist. Remember, like how
Presumably
you
that
used
can be
to,
discovered.
Yeah, that would.
somebody would flag you on Craigslist and when you didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean?
Right.
And-
Well, I
and-
mean,
and-
like, this is kind of like a classic, this is like the problem that anarcho-capitalism has,
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
right? Like,
I didn't know he was recording.
anarcho-capitalism has this, you know, they want to run the world as a series of corporations, but the incentives don't necessarily exist for corporations to act in publicly beneficial ways, right? Like once you have secret knowledge, you're sort of incentivized to use that secret knowledge for differential advantage. And so you end up having to keep track of those bits and pieces. So I've been going for about an hour here. I've got 30 more slides. I'm not going to go through 30 more slides. I'll save the operating system programming stuff for later. I do want to talk a little bit about NOC and the way that things are set up, and then I'll close this out because NOC keeps coming up. So NOC, so a Gödel number. So Kurt Gödel, the incompleteness theorem. He is a mathematician. He was important in the early development of computing, and sometimes people talk about like Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem because it's kind of this fun philosophical puzzle to work on. In the course of proving the incompleteness theorem, he developed a way of writing down any mathematical expression as a unique number. Okay, that's important because that's essentially what we're doing when we write down things as bits, as binary bits on a computer, right? We're writing down a number that represents a command or an address or data, all these things. And this is what your processor is working on. This isn't NOC, this is just a Gödel number. Like if you take something that's written as a lambda calculus, which is an old computing system. If you take something that's written as this process and you want to turn it into a unique number that you can mathematically manipulate, there's a set of rules that let you do that, okay? Now, if you're running on any computer, it's specific, like the thing that you're running is specific to the hardware that you're running, right? If you have an ARM chip, if you have an AMD chip, if you have an Intel 64, it was the old Intel 64, I forget what the name of those were, Itanium, right? All of these have different machine languages that they speak. What NOC does is it defines a simple set of rules that are written in this mathematical way, and each one of these can be represented as actual numbers in the system. Okay, so this is like the language that it runs, is NOC, and it's a set of numbers that represent these axioms and the way that these work. Okay, it's really abstract. It's like programming a machine by typing in ones and zeros, right? Like you're not going to program a machine that way. But the nice thing about building on NOC as your platform, and I'll use this to sort of wrap up where we're going here, is that NOC has this idea called Kelvin versioning. So Kelvin's described 10 degrees above absolute zero. And the idea is that NOC is a cooling specification, and that only minor changes can be made in the future. Essentially what it's doing is that it's guaranteeing that it will be future-proof. that anything that you can run now on Urbit, you will be able to run in 100 years on Urbit. And you don't care about what's running underneath, right? So it solves the problem of, like, how do you actually keep track of what's running on systems, right? Like if you talk to librarians about this, and we have all these things that are back from the 80s that we can't even run. We have architectures that ran important programs for the first time, like on Cray supercomputers in the 1970s, that we don't even have the operating system source code. No one thought to hang on to it. But what we're doing by building things into NOC is we're permanently future-proofing the entire system. Anything that runs on Urbit will be permanently and forever runnable on any future system. And so this solves a lot of problems around, like, what do you do with persistence of data? How do you access old things? It's always going to be accessible if you're running on this kind of a system.
Because Urbit is completely independent from whatever you're running at.
Yes, and because it's a meta operating system on top of that as well. So if other things change later on, I mean, like, one of the things I'm actually exploring is, like, what would be a kind of an Urbit machine, right? Like, what's the minimalist kernel you could set up that, like, you know, just the bare minimum of services you need to manage memory and everything, and then Urbit on top of that. And you'd have a machine that basically doesn't have an operating system except for memory management, and then runs Urbit on top of that layer. And it's kind of an interesting problem to think about. But, you know, once you have that, anything that runs on Urbit runs forever, right? And that machine would run anything that would be written on Urbit even like 100 years from now. I mean, it doesn't mean you're never going to, like, have system upgrades, but it means that all the system upgrades are cast in terms of this set of axioms or small but discrete changes that are made to it. So far, from the original specification, this is the current 4K NOC, there have only been 2 changes made to the rules. And there can only be, in the future, 4 more changes made before it is forever frozen as what it is. You know, so, like, they're not going to make changes lightly. That's only if someone figures out, like, oh, there's actually a much better mathematical way of expressing that set of rules. And so we're going to introduce that as a new piece of the system. So, you know, you don't expect to see this happen more than, like, you know, like these 2 might happen in the next 20 years. These 2 may never happen, right? You know, ideally. So the whole system is built to be cooling. All pieces of Urbit are built to be cooling. So, like, when you talk about the operating system, the Arvo layer, which is the specification of communications and everything, it's also cooling. It's at something like 180 Kelvin. So there's a lot of future possible changes that can be made to it. But the idea is that it becomes more permanent, more stable, not less over time. Let me see, there was a lot of other pieces I was going to get in here. I will end on this point then. So this is a common kind of complaint that people have, that we don't own our data, we don't own our identity. This is someone calling for a world where every communication and action taken with a computer or phone is encrypted at the source and released only with consent. I think most of us would like to see a world like that, where you actually own the things that you make, you actually have control over access to those things. And sometimes you will give other people and other corporations, et cetera, access to those things, right? If you're going to talk to a bank, the bank knows certain things about you or about your account, you have to verify to them that you are the owner of that account. Or maybe we all go to Bitcoin, that would be fine as well. But you're still going to be having to talk to exchanges, et cetera. So it doesn't mean you stop talking to people. It means that you own every piece of that communication that relates to unique information available to you. So Urbit is not necessarily the only way forward, but one of the advantages of starting with a clean slate operating system like this is that it prevents you from relying on any of the crutches and kludges that have been put together already in our system. And so it breaks you free of that system of cascading bad choices where we have a lot of things that are broken in Unix that carry over into the way that Macs run, or that Windows reflects because it copied something when Microsoft made DOS back in 1985, and they're still carrying on to the way this works. Urbit is a clean slate. It's not going to be perfect forever, but it's a clean slate now, so you can build nice new things on top of it, and you're sort of consciously avoiding making the mistakes that have been made to date with that. So it's an interesting society to get into right now. It very much has the feel of like the internet in 1997, where it's the weirdos and the interesting people, and like it's like people who want to be involved in this weird, new, strange, not quite so shiny thing. And so it's a fantastic group to get involved with. Over the next couple of years, it's going to, I mean, it's starting to snowball. I mean, I paid attention to it a few years ago. I started paying attention to it again last year, and I can feel there's energy building around this right now. Like there's a snowball starting. I want to show you briefly what the Urbit operating experience actually looks like. Let me show you. So I'm actually going to run a new Urbit. I'm going to start one. Its name is going to be Zod. And so it's, I'm in the wrong, here we go, sorry. So right now there's two different ways to interact with Urbit. One of them is to run things on a command line, and it can take a while, especially the first time you run it. It's not, you know, it's a lot snappier once you set it up, but the first time you run it, because it's starting from scratch, it has to download everything and get everything running the way that it needs to on the top layer. Let me see if I have one that's already running that I can do. Let's do, let's try NES. Okay. So it's a command line. I can do certain kinds of like Lisp-like operations. So add 1 gives me 2. And so this is basically your command prompt, and you can write code on it. It's kind of like just working on the shell on a Linux system or on a Mac. There's also a browser interface called Landscape.
Let me kill the light seat.
Yeah, that might help. That's a little too much. We'll go here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
And so right now, Landscape is running a few apps here. So there's a publish app, there's a chat app, and then weather and browser and everything. Dojo is the command line. So basically, you can blog and you can chat with people.
And if you
Those are
chat
the
me,
pieces.
it's going directly to me, directly
Right.
to my Urbit, which
Again, peer-to-peer.
Can you
and
say you've ever
encryption,
done
right?
that before?
It's like Signal
And
Line.
it's just YouTube. There's no, like, let's say if you message someone on Twitter, where Twitter would have complete access to that.
Right.
Yeah, and
It's
that's
just YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's like Signal or Telegram in that respect. Like it exists in this one particular context, and there's no way for anyone else to crack it. So like if I go into chat,
So I see there's 123 posts, and that's just like the entire like user base, like everybody on Urbit right now. Like
no, that's the number of blog posts that I have left on.
Oh, that you have left on Reddit?
Yeah, that I've seen from other people. Unfortunately, so it's at the point where it works for this chat room microblogging and regular blogging, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of like select all mark red
Yeah.
and star.
No,
So
no.
it'll get there. But
I was just
it's
curious
not quite there.
because I knew that you said that the user base was pretty small right now.
Yeah, so right now this is what the like if I'm chatting here, you can see I've got my identity. Like there's Litmus Written, there's Nartis Fastrum, there's Rob Nice Rickfer. That's Ted Blackman, who's one of the main developers at Twan. And these are some of the chats that I'm in. So I'm in Minder Folden's party. Minder Folden is here in Chicago, and he's busy tonight, unfortunately. But I want to get him at one of these. Maybe we'll try and get him at the February one. Although he's busy every Friday, so we'd have to do it on the Thursday to get him. Then there's like Weird and Weirder, which are fantastic. Like if you want to find stuff that you're running into, like so here's someone running an effort post on microwave popcorn chemicals. Like it's just great for finding weird stuff. Like there's just this backlog of weird, interesting things that people are sharing here and talking about. So that's the chat. If I go look at the
And if you run that hyperlink, it'll run on the Urbit browser.
this hyperlink.
I mean, before then I saw like a Wikipedia hyperlink.
Oh, so that would be a link back out to the regular one.
Okay.
Right, so.
But
it's,
eventually, would you be able to, is the idea to, that hyperlink will be available on Urbit? Like,
Eventually,
Somebody could store all of Wikipedia and host
right, eventually
Wikipedia.
someone's gonna have a version of Wikipedia that's.
That's the idea.
Local to it.
Okay.
And it'll probably be something clever like WikPed, maybe the identity point. Right, so like my posting, right, so I've got this Atomic Age notebook that I've been working on, that I'm posting a bunch of old notes on that I started 5 hours ago, before I was driving up here. But if I go look at like notebooks from other, oh, these are my notebooks. Okay, so like here's my subscriptions to everyone else. So like running Urbit on Raspberry Pi is someone's problem there. It's somewhere down in here. Anyway, yeah. So right now it's kind of a weird group, and it's.
I want to see inside the Mind Zoo.
Where's the Mind Zoo?
If you scroll up, I think it. Yeah, there we go.
Urbit is where I keep my well. Okay, so Minderfolded likes to take space images, and then he photoshops in Urbit pictures. I mean, that's kind of like what I did with the sword.
Pretty
one,
cool,
like,
actually.
the same kind of thing. But he does fancier ones than I do. Although my favorite one that I've ever done, I do have to show this one. It's the one that you retweeted.
Okay.
Nice.
A view of the 2030.
Where is that from?
That's Tron.
Oh, yeah. Is that the original Tron?
Oh, I
The old school one?
photoshopped this into the original Tron. Yeah.
That's one.
Man, you rock, man.
So I did want to. I mean, I'm basically done. I did want to comment on.
There's a little culture.
I wanted to comment on the origin of names like Urbit and Twan and everything. So, does anyone like Jorge Luis Borges stories of those?
I got
So
into
he was-
it because of this.
Okay,
Yeah.
so he's this Argentine. He was actually the director of their national library, and he started writing this weird metafictional, sort of like phantasmagoria stuff, like back in the 1940s. And one of them is about discovering, it's called Tlan Ukbar Orbis Tertius, and it's where the name Tlan and some of the other Urbit names come from. But it's about they discover this encyclopedia, and it has a set of pages in the middle of it that aren't in any other copy of the encyclopedia in the entire world. And they describe this country that doesn't exist. And like people, like over the next, 40, 50 years, people start finding like more and more bits and pieces from this world that doesn't exist. And it was created by a group of, like a secret society who put this together, and they started seeding it everywhere. But what it ends up doing is everyone's so fascinated by this world that doesn't exist that they start studying this world instead of like our history. They decided the history of this fake world is more interesting than the history of the real world. And so they,
This